Bye weeks are just around the corner, but week 4 still brings its own dilemmas. So there's really only two questions to answer tonight. Who should I stream this week, and who should I stash for the future? Find out on the Fantasy First Down. Welcome back to the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. So, in week 3, did you stream Juwan Jennings? Did you stash Deontay Johnson? Maybe you stashed Braylon Allen. Our streamers and stashes are going well through 3 weeks, but we've got way more to come in week 4. If you haven't already, it would be fantastic if you could follow us on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. You can also like and subscribe on Instagram. Plus, you can check out my rankings at ffdfantasyfootball.com. They're already out for this week. And of course, you can check out my articles at football.rasball.com. On Rasball, I write an article about streamers and stashes, hence this show, and that'll be out already. So you can check out some more detail there. Plus, I also do a slot versus wide analysis, which is a tool unique to Rasball, and I recommend checking it out if you haven't already. They've got some fantastic tools that I use on Rasball, and hence why I'm the second highest ranked wide receiver ranker so far this season on Fantasy Pros. But today's not the day to talk about me. Today is the day to talk about streamers and stashes. So let's get into it. And my QB streamers for this week, it's a bit of a tough week for QB streamers. There's no great matchups, but I've gone for Caleb Williams here. It seemed like Brock Purdy absolutely destroyed the Rams, and realistically only really had Brandon Ayuk and definitely Juwan Jennings. Well, Caleb Williams has better weapons than that, especially if Keenan Allen comes back. Plus, he is improving. He looked better in his second week, had his first couple of touchdowns. Of course, one to the rookie Rome Odunze as well. Plus, Cole Kmet actually started to play like he's meant to as well. So I do think Williams is taking steps in the right direction. He is a viable streamer this week if you need one. Another option is Justin Fields against Indy. I do think this is a really good matchup. I feel like he has a slightly safer floor, only slightly. But realistically, both of these guys still come with plenty of risk. I certainly wouldn't be starting them over your locked-in guys that you've been starting all season. Even guys like Anthony Richardson and people like that who have been really disappointing, you still have to start them. You cannot start these guys off people like Richardson and Stroud, even if you're disappointed with their output so far. Now, stashes, Jordan Love is someone that you might be tempted to start this week, and you can. But it's a pretty tough matchup. Minnesota's actually been pretty good against quarterbacks this season. Their secondary is massively improved. They've got a good D-line. So I do think that Love might struggle in his first week back, especially given he hasn't been training fully. So I do think this could be a bit of a challenge for him, but he's definitely someone you want on your roster, especially with bye weeks coming up. So he's someone you could start, but realistically, you're probably better off putting him on your bench and waiting a week. I don't really love benching quarterbacks, but it's not like Love's so good that you absolutely must start him every week. And I do think this is a situation, especially if you've got a bye week coming up, where it is viable to have 2 quarterbacks on your bench. You are going to have situations around bye weeks and injuries where you will need to have a second quarterback on your bench, but I wouldn't be doing it if you've got a start and you're just able to start them each week. You don't need to hold on to a quarterback for a future bye week just in case. There'll always be someone on waivers for that 1 week if your quarterback's healthy. Let's talk about running back streamers. Had some of these guys last week, of course. Zach Moss is back. He was excellent, and he was one of our streamers last week, and he returned. He's taking on Carolina. We've seen that they're a very good running back matchup, unless you're the Raiders. I don't know what's going on with that. Samir White was really disappointing. He just doesn't get used when they're behind. And I didn't expect them to be behind. No one did. And if you did, well, what are you doing here? You should put all your money on the on the Panthers, and you wouldn't need to be watching me. But Moss, I do think, is going to have an easier time. I think the Bengals will get an early lead and stick with it. They did struggle admittedly against the Commanders, but Carolina's not the Commanders. And I do think a second week with Andy Dalton is going to show teams what to expect a little bit as well. Brian Robinson Jr. is really only a viable option if Austin Eckler is out. And I do think Austin Eckler probably will be out with that head injury. They will probably bring in some Jeremy McNichols. You might even see some Chris Rodriguez, but it is going to be Brian Robinson Jr. for the most part. He might even get some passing down work for a change. So I do think we're going to see a lot of Robinson. He goes from being kind of like a low-end flex option to being a guy you really have to start, like a high-end running back too kind of situation. Obviously not someone available on waivers, but if you've got him on your roster, probably want to be starting him. Braylon Allen is my deeper option. He's someone that's still available on waivers in some leagues, and that's insane to me. I've been talking about this guy since the preseason. So you absolutely have to pick him up off waivers if you haven't already. He has the most upside of every player in the league that's not obviously starting already. Think about what's going to happen if Breece Hall gets injured. Breece Hall goes down. Well, they're still going to run the ball a heap, and it's going to be Braylon Allen. We've seen that he can produce, and the running attack is a big part of their offense. All of a sudden, you don't have Hall and Allen splitting touches. You just have Allen getting all of the touches. There'll be a little bit of Isaiah Davis, maybe some Abanikunda, but Allen suddenly becomes a workhorse back in an offense that can and will run the ball. He'll be like a top 5 running back some weeks. So you must have him on your bench just in case there's a Breece Hall injury, because we've seen running backs get injured. Just ask Christian McCaffrey and literally every other running back in the league. So Braylon Allen, someone you have to have on your bench. But this week, I even think you can start him. Against Denver, I expect the Jets to win easily enough, and that means they'll use a lot of Allen. They're trying to rest up Hall whenever possible, and this does feel like the kind of week where we could see a lot more Allen. So if you're in a little bit of trouble, Allen kind of becomes a low-end running back 3 for me and a viable flex option. If you're battling with injuries, I certainly prefer him over guys like, I don't know, Ezekiel Elliott or Bucky Irving or something like that, like those awkward options. Even Javonte Williams isn't a great matchup. I think you can argue that, especially in PPR, Allen's a more viable option than him. So he's someone that you can certainly bring in and use. Now, here's some stashes. And speaking of Cowboys players, Rico Dowdle's become the clear starter for the Cowboys. He's playing well ahead of Zeke. He started and played the first couple of drives. And yes, they use a little bit of juice form, which is inconvenient. And yes, they still use Zeke, especially when they're behind, because he's slightly better passing down back. But realistically, Dowdle is the guy. And I signaled this early in the preseason, and I talked about this a lot about Dowdle's a guy you can get very late in drafts, and he will be a starter quite quickly. Now, he's not a high-end starter at the moment. That's why you can't really start him yet. But all it will take is for the Cowboys to start winning some games, and he will take over, and he could get that Tony Pollard-style role. Now, the problem is the Cowboys' O-line is not fit. They're not healthy, and they're not playing particularly well. Not only that, but the defense is really easy to run on, so they're not getting the lead in a lot of games. So that's made it really awkward for Dowdle. But I do think, especially in easy matchups, this is a guy you can use potentially this week against the Giants, but certainly later on in the season when their matchups ease up a little bit. I think this is a guy you're going to want to have on your roster. Now, to be clear, if your roster is very strong already, if you've already got 3 or 4 good starting running backs, I'm talking about like top 15 guys, you don't need Dowdle. He lacks that upside. That's where you go back and get a Braylon Allen or even a Bucky Irving, because if things go right, then they'll have a much better role than Dowdle will. Dowdle's never going to be anything more than a running back 2. There's Bucky Irving. Fantastic stash. Obviously, there's a chance he takes over from Rachaad White for the lead role. It's also possibly splits that role. But if White goes down, then all of a sudden you've got a very good player who's going to get a very heavy workload. We saw that Rachaad White was the running back 3 in some scoring settings last year. It was certainly top 6. Irving could definitely get that volume and be very productive. Their run game hasn't been very good this year, but Irving has been the bright spark. And Ty Chandler is certainly getting plenty of early down touches for Minnesota, but you don't have him for those early down touches. You have him for an Aaron Jones injury. If Aaron Jones goes down, Ty Chandler's a really talented player, and he will get used a lot. So I think that he's the kind of stash that you can pick, that you can leave on your bench and then use when Jones has that inevitable injury that he has most seasons. There's also plenty of other players like that. I think Zach Charbonnet, obviously, when there's an injury to Kenneth Walker, he's amazing. Think Antonio Gibson. If Ramondre Stevenson goes down, Gibson's going to be very solid and going to get a good workload. Any of those handcuff players, they're who you have on your bench. No point in having someone like a Jaleel McLaughlin who, even if Javonte Williams gets injured, I mean, when are you wanting to use Jaleel McLaughlin? If he's the lead guy, he's going to get, 8 carries, and he's still going to be useless. So take these guys who are going to get heavy workloads, are going to be running back 1s or mid-range running back 2s if things go right for them. Wide receivers, and not as much available at this time of year for wide receivers. People have generally picked up the quality players. But Rome Odunze is still available in a lot of leagues, and he's on benches in a lot of leagues. And this week, he takes on the Rams, which is a fantastic matchup. If Keenan Allen's out, then Odunze is a great start. If Keenan Allen plays and is expected to be limited, then Odunze is a solid start. And if Keenan Allen plays and expected to play full snaps, then this becomes a whole lot iffier. But we're talking about streamers here. We're talking about guys you wouldn't ordinarily start, and I think Odunze falls into that category. I think he's still a viable flex option, even if Keenan Allen's a full go. Juwan Jennings, and we saw what happened last week. He scored 52 PPR points. He's the wide receiver 2 on the year after doing very little in the first 2 weeks. Absolutely insane. Very impressive. Good to see him finally having that sort of game. He's only going to be useful until we see Deebo Samuel come back, and assuming that Brandon Ayuk can stay healthy. Even George Kittle coming back is going to affect Jennings. He doesn't have the greatest matchup this week, but he is still someone you can stream viably. We've seen what he can do. You can't not use him if you've got him on your roster and you're a little bit struggling at wide receiver. Guys like Michael Pittman is where I think that Juwan Jennings kind of sits in that sort of range where you don't fully trust them, but they're still solid players. In that sort of situation, you might go, well, maybe I'll go Juwan Jennings instead. And Jahan Dotson, I mean, this is only if AJ Brown's not back and Devonta Smith's out. The odds of both of those things happening is relatively low, probably less than 50%. But if both of those things happen, all of a sudden Dotson becomes the wide receiver 1. If they don't happen, then I don't know that you really want to start Dotson. They've got better options. And I feel like Dallas Goedert is the main guy that benefits from that situation. But there's not a lot of good wide receiver streamers this week. So I wanted to mention Dotson as an option if those things happen and only those things happen. Now, stashes. Cam Coleman, well, he got punished for being late or something. I assume that's a late to training or meeting situation, and what sat out the first quarter, and then also had his snaps very limited for the rest of the game. He was not out there much, but when he was out there, caught his first touchdown. Very weird way of punishing a player by targeting them in the red zone. I guess they do want to win. Coleman had a total of 20 snaps out of 64. Given he didn't play the whole first quarter, which means even when he had come back, he was still only playing less than half of the snaps. Marcus Valdes-Scantling played a lot. Khalil Shakir's snaps rose. Matt Collins' snaps dropped. And Curtis Samuel, even with Coleman out, is still not being used. You've got to drop Curtis Samuel. I don't know why you'd still have him if you have him, but he's so droppable. He was droppable at the start of the season. I talked about that during the preseason. He's not someone you want. Khalil Shakir is probably the guy to own this offense from a wide receiver perspective for now, but obviously it's James Cook's the actual valuable player and Dalton Kincaid to an extent. I do think Coleman has some upside, and I'm still willing to stash him, and he'll have been dropped in a lot of leagues despite that touchdown. So pick him up, stick him on your bench. The upside's huge. He still has Stephon Diggs like upside. He just needs to put it all together, and I do think that's possible, though not likely. Darnell Mooney's the other guy I like, and I liked him in the preseason as well. I've talked about the Falcons a lot. They had a horrible first 4 weeks of matchups, and they still have the Saints obviously here. But after that, it cleans up real nicely. And I do think we're going to see a lot of Saints production from their wide receivers. Drake London's kind of gotten by. Kyle Pitts was hoping for a bit more, but he's kind of been solid, had that touchdown in week 1 and kind of produced okay. But Mooney's been good. He's been targeted quite a lot. Ray McLeod gets involved a little bit. In fact, it's Mooney and McLeod that have been quite high scoring and getting a lot of yardage. London's been used in the red zone. So it is Mooney who you do want to target in this offense. He's their wide receiver too. And I do think in the coming weeks, not this week, but after that, he's going to be very productive. You can probably pick him up next week. I think he'll probably still be available. But if you're unsure and he could have a boom game, then picking him up now is a good idea if you've got that available bench spot. Let's talk about tight ends. And I mean, the tight end landscape is so whack. I don't know what to make of this. Let me just go through the top tight end target getters last week. See if you can predict who the top 6 might be. I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, your second's up. Here's the top 6. Dallas Goedert, who had a heap, obviously, because they had all their receivers out, and Devonta Smith got injured. Jake Ferguson, who is one of their top 2 options in that offense. They need to pass the ball a lot. Cole Kmet, and now that might not seem crazy to you, but it is, because he's been playing behind Gerald Everett so far this season. If I look at what Kmet's like routes run, and typically you want at least 30 routes for a tight end to be productive. Even someone like Kate Otten will be running 35 to 40 routes in the game. The top tight ends are kind of always over 30 routes. Cole Kmet in the first 2 weeks. In week 1, he had 12 routes. Week 2, he had 28 because they did use him a little bit more. But realistically, it's still Everett's been running over 20 routes. Then in week 3, randomly goes out and absolutely explodes, like 10 for 11 for 98 yards or something and a touchdown, 97 yards, something like that. Look, insane. Don't understand where that's come from. Really weird situation. Then Kate Otten. Number 4, just mentioned him there. Jordan Akins, who I tried to talk about streaming earlier and then he didn't get used properly, all of a sudden getting the targets I expected the week before. Tyler Conklin, where did that come from? And then Noah Fant out of nowhere. He's another guy I've been really high on this season, and he kind of just hasn't produced. All of a sudden, these tight ends just popping up, and all the guys we'd expect it to be, your Travis Kelce's, your Sam Laporta's, Kyle Pitts should have had a good matchup there. Like all of these top tight ends most weeks, Mark Andrews barely getting used. He ran like 6 routes. Even Likely, who's on a lot of rosters, people have been paying up for him. It's just absolutely insane. I don't understand what's happening with tight ends at the moment. I can't trust anything that I'm saying with tight ends. This is the lowest I've ever been ranked in tight end rankings or in any position. I just can't work it out. So I don't understand what's going on with tight ends, but if I had to pick somebody this week, Cole Kmet all of a sudden getting used properly, and he faces the Rams. Especially if Keenan Allen's out, all of a sudden Kmet's a real option. If Allen plays, I'd drop him down a little bit, but I still think he's better than any other tight end streamers. Pat Frymouth gets a matchup against Indy. He's not really getting used a lot. He's running like 20 snaps a game, and as I said, you're aiming for 30. But he is kind of a target for this offense, and Justin Fields tends to use him a reasonable amount. Now that he's not rushing as much and he's kind of checking down a whole lot more, you do see a lot more targets for Frymouth. Plus, Jalen Warren might be out, and if Jalen Warren's out, then they're less likely to check down to Najee Harris. So it is possible they'll use Frymouth. Plus, Cordero Patterson's being used in the slot occasionally, and he's not as good a target as an actual wide receiver. No offense to Patterson, who's a fantastic player. Frymouth will therefore get more targets in that case, and the Colts give away a lot of points to tight ends. So there are reasons to use Frymouth, but you'd have to be pretty darn desperate if you ask me. Let's talk about stashes and Dalton Schultz. This one kind of slipped through the cracks for me. I didn't really notice that Brevin Jordan had a torn ACL. It didn't occur to me what that's going to mean. So Jordan has been taking quite a lot of pass-catching tight end snaps for the Texans. Now that he's out, they haven't replaced him with anyone. They've just got Schultz on the field for more. So that means that Schultz is going to run a whole lot more routes and going to have more opportunities for targets. Now, will it actually happen? Probably not, but it might. And there is upside there. And in the current tight end landscape, which is sparse at best, I do think that Schultz is someone you can pick up. And if there's an injury to Nico Collins or Stephon Diggs in particular, or even to Tank Dell, all of a sudden Schultz could be the one that benefits and gets those targets that we saw him getting last year when they only had 2 viable wide receiver options. So Schultz is someone I do like stashing if you're struggling at tight end. Also go out and check to see if David Njoku or maybe an Evan Ingram is available. They're both guys that could be available because people do get impatient and drop plays when there are injuries early in the season. Kickers, obviously, still extraordinarily unpredictable. We did okay. We went 1 from 2 last week. Daniel Carlson was a bit disappointing. Missed a reasonably gettable kick. That's unusual for him. That was his first miss of the season. If he had gotten that, all of a sudden he's a top 10 player. Blake Grupe is my pick for this week. For whatever reason, the Falcons are just having a whole lot of kicks against them. They've conceded 11 field goals this season, 6 in week 1 to Boswell. That was more of a Justin Fields being unable to score situation. But even despite that, still 5 in the last 2 weeks combined. They are conceding over 15 points to kickers each game on average. The next highest is 12.6 or something like that. So they're, nearly 3 points ahead of the next highest kicker point conceding team. Pretty crazy. Don't expect that to continue, but still a solid matchup. Clearly, I do think this could be a kickathon between Grupe and Koo. So Grupe's a solid option. Evan McPherson, obviously an excellent option against Carolina. He's owned in quite a few leagues though, so you're unlikely to be able to go out and get him. But if you have him already, don't get rid of him and put someone else in. Do start McPherson, and if he's available, I would be using him. Grupe is a guy that's available in a lot more leagues. I think his ownership percentage going into this week was like 15%. So you can go and get Grupe. Cairo Santos is a low-end guy if you're really struggling for options. You can also go out and get Santos as well. DSTs. Kind of like the Titans this week against Miami. We saw them really struggle under Skylar Thompson. Now he's kind of injured. I can't imagine Tim Boyle's going to be the guy they use. There's talk about Tyler Huntley, for example, but he's not going to really know the offense. Titans have looked really good this season. Their secondary's massively improved, and that's previously been their weakness. They've always been a good run defense. So it is possible that against Miami, where they want to run the ball, they suddenly can't, and you get a situation where they really struggle to score points, and that's going to really help the Titans DST. If, on the other hand, you've got one of those leagues where you get a lot of points for sacks, interceptions, big plays, as well, then you probably want to ease towards other DSTs, because I think the Titans are going to be one of those teams that concedes few points, but they don't get as much production. They're getting like 3 sacks a week at the moment. The Cowboys obviously have been really disappointing the last 2 weeks, but they face the Giants. I do think a lot of people are going to drop them because of that poor production. So if you can, go and pick them up. Go and get them. Same deal with McPherson. If he's available, use them. I do love the Cowboys this week. They've been a top 2 defense the last 3 seasons. They're going to be fantastic again. They will get right. They do need to improve their run blocking, but against the Giants, I still expect them to have a really good game. And that's all we've got. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe on YouTube. That really helps us out. Instagram, where I answer all of your questions, or you can just pop them in the comments below, of course, is at the Fantasy First Down. Twitter, at Fantasy First Down with no O. Our rankings are over at ffdfantasyfootball.com. We are currently redoing the website. It will be a lot nicer soon, but it's still working right now. Plus, you can check out my articles at football.rasball.com. I will be back on Saturday when I'll be going through all of my starts and sits for week 4. I hope you will join me for that. But in the meantime, have an awesome week, and I'll see you soon.